Hey guys, Endless here, welcome back to the channel. This is part 5 for what if Fem Deku has Requip magic. Also check out the other videos on my playlists. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy. As the contestants of the sports festival finished the obstacle race, Izumi waited next to Midnight. Said heroine looked over towards the scarlet-haired girl and asked, "So I heard you're taking the provisional license exams during your internship." Izumi glanced at Midnight and spoke after a moment. "Yeah, you had heard right, the press had found out that I am All Might's daughter and had heard how strong I was." Midnight just nodded after she heard this and looked over towards the finish line. She then spoke up to the scarlet-haired girl. "Well, you are powerful, but make sure you take your career seriously." After Izumi had heard this, she stood up and spoke after a few seconds. "Yeah, I will." After she said this, the scarlet-haired girl walked over towards her classmates. 5 minutes later, Midnight had spoke up after she noticed that 41 applicants had made it past the finish line. "Alright, everyone who had passed, stand in front of me and I will reveal the next event for the sports festival." She then continued. "For those who didn't pass, head over towards the stands and sit in the designated area for your class." After she said this, said students had made their way towards the stands. After she made sure that only the 41 applicants were standing in front of her, she spoke once again. "Now, for the next event of the sports festival." Midnight then pressed a button and a spin wheel had appeared by her side. The heroine then spun said wheel and waited for it to land on something. After a moment, it was about to land on cavalry battle, but that's when it landed on Battle Royale. She frowned at this and looked up towards the announcers. When Midnight had saw the duo shrug, she muttered under her breath and spoke in a loud tone. "The next event of the sports festival will be Battle Royale." The applicants just looked at her confused, but that's when she continued. "There will be a wide circle that will cover most of this arena." As she said this, robots had came out and started to spray white paint over the grass. "You will have to stay within the circle for 15 minutes and whoever gets thrown out is eliminated from the festival." After Izumi had heard this, she glanced around her at the applicants and had a small smile on her face. "This will be fun," the red-haired girl thought, but right after said girl thought this, Midnight pointed in her direction and spoke with a grin. "But first place will start in the middle of the circle." After she had said this, Izumi stared at the center of the circle and walked towards it. Midnight nodded towards Izumi and she stared at Present Mike. Said hero coughed and spoke in a loud voice. "Let the second event of the sports festival begin." Once he said this, some of the students that was near Izumi tried to dash towards her, but said girl just muttered, "Requip Lightning Empress Armor." After she said this, there was a yellow glow, and when it died down, Izumi launched her staff towards the ground. And a magical circle appeared at the tip. Monoma and Tetsu tried to jump away, but that's when blue lightning appeared from the ground. Boom! Izumi pulled her staff out of the ground and stared at the 10 unconscious students that were around her. Present Mike shouted in shock. While with one move Izumi Scarlet took out 10 opponents. He then turned over towards Aizawa and spoke to the sleep-deprived man. Do you think they will be okay?" After he had said this, Aizawa glanced at his friend and spoke after a moment. "Well, she has been training all her life, being surrounded with pro heroes, it's only natural she is going to be a cut above the rest." Present Mike was about to comment, but that's when Aizawa spoke up while closing his eyes. "However, that alone might not be enough." Back to Izumi. The scarlet-haired girl had noticed that none of her classmates were in the bunch of unconscious students. As soon as she thought this, however, Izumi heard an explosion behind her along with a yell from an angry blonde. "Die!" The scarlet-haired girl sighed and jumped into the air. As she did, Izumi raised her spear in defense and Bakugo had launched an explosion towards the red-haired girl. The impact of the explosion sent Izumi flying back a few feet, but she flipped and landed onto the ground. As she landed, however, so did the blonde, and that's when he spoke with a grin. "You know, I wanted a rematch ever since you defeated me so easily the last time we fought." He then continued while getting into a stance. This time I won't go down until I win. After Bakugo had said this, he dashed towards Izumi with his explosions. Said girl stared at the approaching blonde and shouted, "Requip Flame Empress Armor." After the yellow light died down, she dashed towards the blonde and swung her blade forward. As she did so, a line of flames followed after. The blonde's eyes went wide at the torrent of flames and moved both of his hands to the side and launched an explosion. Once Bakugo had did so, there was a massive boom. All of the contestants stared at the crater that Izumi had created with wide eyes. And the crowd, along with pro heroes, were no better. However, Bakugo just gritted his teeth and launched himself towards Izumi while spinning. "Try and block this," he then roared. Howitzer impact. Izumi's right hand lit up in a yellow glow and a silver shield had appeared a second later. She then stabbed said shield into the ground and muttered, "Adamantine barrier." After the scarlet-haired girl had said this, a green magical array appeared in front of her shield. And as soon as it appeared, Bakugo launched his hand forward. Boom! As this was happening, Todoroki kicked Mineta out of bounds and huffed. He then noticed the massive array and ran towards the duo. "If I'm able to defeat All Might's daughter with only my ice." As Todoroki thought this, Jirota appeared in front of him in his beast form and roared, "Where do you think you're going, Class 1A's elite?" Once he said this, said student launched a swipe towards Todoroki. Said boy dodged the attack and spoke in a cold tone, "Move, you're in the way." After he said this, Todoroki stomped his foot onto the ground. Boom! The half and half boy stared at the students that were now trapped in his ice, then back at Bakugo and Izumi. TCH. He put his hand onto said ice and steam started to come off from his left side. Back to Izumi. She dodged a swipe from Bakugo and was about to launch an attack with her wind god sword, but that's when a tongue wrapped around her handle. The scarlet-haired girl almost let go due to the unexpected attack, and she stared at Tsuyu, who spoke, "Don't forget we are all here too." As she said this, Mina and Kaminari launched their attack in unison towards Izumi. Said girl stared at her right hand and let go of her sword. As she did this, however, there was a shout from behind. "Cat shield." The shield blocked the lightning attack and Lily landed right next to Izumi. Said girl smiled at her best friend, and that's when Lily spoke up. "Sorry they didn't let me pass, so it took me quite a while to get to your side." After Izumi had heard this, she glanced at the remaining applicants and spoke after a moment. "Now that you're here, protect yourself with that shield." Lily raised an eyebrow and did as she was told. After Izumi had saw this, she flared her magical aura. And the ground beneath her had cracked due to the pressure. The scarlet-haired girl then shouted, "Requip Heaven's Wheel Armor." Once Bakugo had saw this, he muttered, "Oh shit." He then jumped back with an explosion. As soon as he did so, Izumi roared, all the while swinging her swords in a downward slash. Scattered petals. As she said this, swords had appeared above her and they were all launched towards the ground. When said swords made impact, there were consecutive booms. Nizu started to laugh like a madman when almost everyone in the arena got knocked out due to that attack. He then looked over to All Might, who had a proud look. "You know, we forgot to give her weights," Nizu stated with a chuckle. The number one hero looked over towards the Chimera and spoke after a moment. "Maybe we should only limit her to one armor for the one-on-one battle." Nizu just hummed at this and he sent a text towards Hisashi. Said hero looked at his phone and spoke into the mic after a moment. "It hasn't been 15 minutes yet, but we still have one more event." He then continued, "So the second event of the sports festival is now over." Todoroki's left side flared and the flames burned the ice that shielded him from the swords. He then stared at Izumi's retreating figure with a glare. Right when I was about to attack, that's when she knocked almost everyone out. Izumi rubbed her wrist and thought back to when Bakugo had attacked her with that explosion. It actually packed quite a punch. she thought with a frown. But that's when said girl heard a cough behind her. The scarlet-haired girl turned around and was surprised to see her father along with Nizu. However, as soon as Lily spotted Nizu, she tried to hug the principal, but said Chimera had raised his paw up and spoke. I know that I am fluffy, but we have something to tell Izumi, and you may come along as well if you'd like. After he said this, Izumi raised an eyebrow and asked, why am I the only one that has to be told something? All Might just chuckled nervously, all the while handing Izumi a set of 4 weighted bands. For this last event you must wear these and follow us to the teacher's lounge so Nizu could explain. Izumi and Lily looked at one another, then followed after the duo. Now we skip to 5 minutes later. Midnight stared at the names of the remaining contestants and spoke after a moment. I will now announce the names of the students who will be competing in the last event of the sports festival. She then continued in a loud tone. Izumi Scarlet, Shoto Todoroki, Katsuki Bakugo, Lily Aizawa, Tenya Lida, Ejiro Kirishima, Shirhai Korwaro, Fumikage Koyami, Juzo Hananuki, Achiko Yararaka, Momo Yayaruzu, Hanta Siro, Mizo Shoji, Kyokajiro, Tagaru Kamakiri, Rikido Sato. As she finished, Cementos created the fighting arena, and after he was done the pro hero gave a thumbs up towards Midnight. Said heroine just grinned and looked over towards present Mike. Can Izumi Scarlet and Tagaru Kamakiri make their way to the arena? He said in a booming tone. After the scarlet-haired girl had heard this, she made her way towards the door and she glanced back at Nizu and All Might. Fine, I will do as you ask, but for the finals I'm only going to wear the weights. The principal just nodded and sipped his tea, all the while moving Lily's hand away. 2 minutes later. Izumi walked onto the stage, and as she did, present Mike spoke up. On one side is Izumi Scarlet, and she is who I'm rooting for. He then coughed and ignored Aizawa's glare. Versus the one that can cut through steel, Tagaru Kamakiri. Once the duo were standing in front of one another, Midnight had appeared at the side of the arena. She then spoke up. Are both fighters ready? She asked with a smirk. After they nodded, Midnight swiped her hand down and shouted. Then Hajime. After Midnight had said this, Izumi muttered. Requip, clear heart clothing. Mineta drooled at the sight before him, but it quickly stopped when Kirishima smacked the midget. Not manly, bro. Anyways, back to the fight. The light died down and Izumi stared at her opponent, who grew 2 blades on his arms. He then got into a stance. So this will be a fight of swordsmanship. After the scarlet-haired girl had said this, Izumi moved one hand in front of her and another behind her. Once she did so, a light appeared by her hands, and as soon as they appeared, Izumi grabbed onto them and it was revealed to be 2 winged swords. After Tagaru had saw this, he smirked and dashed towards Izumi at his top speed. Said girl noticed this and got into a stance. Just as she did, Tagaru appeared in front of her and swung both of his blades towards the scarlet-haired girl. Said girl parried the blow and launched an attack of her own towards his head. Kamakiri moved his left arm up in defense and flinched. Izumi's leg made contact with his arm. He then got sent back a few feet and Izumi took this time to dash towards the boy. Tagaru created a blade under his foot and that stopped his momentum. Just as he did, the spiky-haired boy heard footsteps coming towards him. He then raised both of his blades in a cross, and that's when Izumi did a downward slash. Once both blades collided, Izumi smiled when she heard a crack. Tagaru paled and the ground beneath him cracked. How much strength does she have? He thought in a panic. Thinking quickly, Tagaru created another blade at the palm of his hand and launched it towards Izumi. Said girl noticed this and let go of her 2 blades and jumped away. She then stared at her wrist and frowned. They added more weights onto them. Izumi then sighed and grinned. Nizu didn't say anything about changing weapons, only armor. She then roared. Red-black twin blades, said Chimera Face, faulted at this and sighed. Well, she is right, we forgot to mention her weapons. Izumi then dashed the green-haired boy and launched a high kick towards him. Tagaru dodged the blow and did a slash with one of his blades. After the scarlet-haired girl had noticed this, she flared her magic and her blades combined into one. She then did a downward slash with all of her strength. When the blade made impact with Tagaru's, there was a boom. Izumi huffed and stared at the ground. That's where she noticed the unconscious Tagaru. He must have lost consciousness due to the impact. Then, as an afterthought, well, at least the weights have some use. After Midnight had noticed that Izumi had one. Robots had appeared onto the stage and picked up the unconscious boy. She then coughed and spoke in a loud tone for everyone in the stadium to hear. Winner Izumi Scarlet, said girl, just muttered Requip, and was now wearing the PE uniform. As she was leaving the arena, that's when Present Mike spoke into the intercoms. Can Rikido Sato and Shirhai Korwaro make their way towards the fighting arena? After the duo had heard this. But that is the end of this part. If you enjoyed this part, leave a like and subscribe. Also tell me in the comments on how this part had came out.